So let's look through a few other components.
Okay.
There are a number of components in this recipe gallery. We're not going to go through them all, but I want to show a couple more. So we've got our hello expressions and hello for each and hello conditional rendering. We're going to show these real quick. So expressions, we're going to see kind of how a getter works. And that's going to be a very useful pattern that we'll want to adopt in our own behavior. So in hello expressions, let me show you the template markup first. So I have a lightning card. I've got a couple lightning inputs on it. And then I have a property that I want to show called uppercase full name. And that's going to be the concatenation of first name and last name plus some other modifications.
Expression.
It's similar, but it's not. That's a great...
It's like an expression,
that's a
but
great
it's not an
assumption.
expression.
We're going to talk about that.
Okay.
So in my actual JavaScript file, I've got two variables here, two properties, first name and last name, that are tracked. And I have a getter. And I know it's a getter because I have the keyword get in front of it. So it's a very explicit thing. I have a get or set in front of a function saying this is something that's going to be available as a property in my template. So from my markup, I have a property reference, and it has a string name. And that can refer to an actual property or a getter. They're transparent as to whether it's one or the other from the perspective of the
This is
consumer.
similar to Visual Force, where we put the get and the set in front of
Very similar.
the name that we end up using.
Yeah, and that's an incredibly useful pattern because no one outside of us cares if we have to run additional logic for getting and setting. They just want to access or mutate. So in this case, we want to access a property that's not a real property. It's actually a modification of some other property. So in this case, we're using a string template, and we're concatenating these two together, these two other properties. This is just a JavaScript syntactical sugar. We could have also done this with the plus symbol. We're taking the two properties, concatenating them together, and then changing them to uppercase. And we're doing that on the fly. So when the template is accessed and that uppercase full name property is attempted to be retrieved, it actually calls JavaScript code, modifies its state, that the representation of that state, serves it up as if it was a property that had always been there. So very handy. Now, I want to go back to how you said this is an expression, because this is very similar to how I use expressions. And in Aura, if I wanted to do something like this, I would probably concatenate these together, right? If I was in Aura, I would have something like v.first name plus a space plus v.last name, and this would be in a, an expression inside quotes.
Curly brace and a bang, etc.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't need the quotes because it's actually in raw. So that's how I would do that in Aura. That's a compile failure in LWCs. You actually can't do any operations inside of a property tag. And the purpose is because those are hard to calculate, they're hard to track. They want to push everything into that JavaScript file. So they'd much rather have you do any kind of manipulation, even if it's simple, inside your JavaScript file and then surface that as a getter or a standalone property.
Got it. So the concept of expressions that Salesforce developers have gotten used to with embedded expressions in Visual Force and embedded expressions in Aura has gone away?
They've moved, right? You essentially leave a token in the markup that represents the expression.
Right, but you're not writing the expression logic in the markup anymore.
Right, the logic moves into the JavaScript file.
Got it.
And then you just have a breadcrumb back to it with that property name.
Which is a lot more consistent because the logic is now consisting only lives only in JavaScript.
And it's testable.
And
because
it's
I can
testable.
call that function.
Right. So by isolating the logic away from the markup, you're actually gaining a benefit by allowing it to be testable in the various testing frameworks that you can use with your components.
And it keeps your markup a lot simpler.
Yeah.
Right? Because people have done some pretty crazy nested expressions,
Oh, yeah.
ands and ors and all kinds of crazy stuff.
We've seen all sorts of stuff.
All right. Let's look at a few more components.
Okay.